This is Audiovisual Cultures, the podcast that explores different areas of the arts and media. Join me, your host, Paula Blair, and the researchers, practitioners, and enthusiasts I meet along the way. See our website at audiovisualcultures.wordpress.com and other links in the show notes for more information. For now, enjoy the show. Thank you for tuning in to Audiovisual Cultures, the podcast that explores different areas of arts and culture with me, your host, Paula Blair. Today, we're returning to a topic of great interest to me, but it's one that we haven't visited for a while, namely museums, with my special guest today, Mackenzie Finklea. Mackenzie is the author of Beyond the Halls, an insider's guide to loving museums. And Mackenzie has a background in anthropology as well. So these are all great topics for us to really get stuck into. After I extend a very warm welcome to Mackenzie. Hello.
Hello. It's so nice to meet you and talk to you today.
Yeah, likewise. Mackenzie, how are you doing? Are you well today?
I am doing well today. Thank you for asking. If you hear any low buzz, that is the fun musical sounds of the cicadas in the trees outside my house. It is very hot where I am, and I'm very thankful to be inside in the air conditioning.
Okay, interesting. Is it okay to ask whereabouts you are at the moment?
Absolutely. I am from Houston, Texas, in the United States.
That's pretty exciting. Texas is a state I'm very curious about. I'm very curious about all of the Americas, but yeah, Texas is an interesting place, I gather. But yes, very hot at the moment.
Yes, it is an interesting place. It is an enormous state with all different kinds of cultures and biomes.
We're going to talk quite a bit about museums. I hope we're going to properly nerd out about museums. It's a topic I really love. We have had some episodes about museum visits and certain museums and that kind of thing, but not for a really long time. So I'm so grateful that you've brought up this opportunity to talk about this. It's a topic really close to my heart as well. I've loved all kinds of museums since childhood, and I was wondering, what is it about museums that really draws you in so much?
That's such a good question. What is it about museums that draws me in so much? I think for me, I am an incredibly visual person, and I also love to learn. And museums are a beautiful marriage of those two things. I love going to museums and getting to see objects of history, kind of having those starstruck moments where like, oh, look, this is a piece of the moon you can actually touch. What? Things like that. And getting to learn then to continue on the moon example, there was this really great exhibit where they had all these different scales and you could learn about the difference between mass and gravity with these scales. And it would tell you how much you would weigh on different planets.
Cool.
Right? On the moon versus all these other things. And so getting to see those actual numbers and laugh about them with your friends, right? Like the thousands of pounds you'd weigh on Jupiter, right? It's fun interactives and moments like that and shared experiences that are why I love museums so much.
That's a fantastic answer. Do you have a favorite type of museum? Do you love all museums equally, or are there particular types of museum? Because I quite like some specialized museums.
I have a special place in my heart for natural history museums. Those are probably my favorite type. I do love all types. I love visiting all types. More recently, I found a newfound love for art museums and contemporary art. So my favorites and my current loves are always changing, but there is a special place in my heart for natural history.
Is that to do with life on this planet and learning more about that, more about human history? What is it exactly about natural history that really gets you so much?
It's exactly that. It's all of the above. What gets me is trying to answer these really big picture questions of who are we? Where do we come from? How does the world work in all its facets? How do animals live, breathe, eat, reproduce? What's the water cycle? What's volcanoes and natural disasters and all of these really big wow factor things that are very much real parts of our life that we for centuries are seeking to understand And always, always, there is something new to learn. And there's always a new fossil that's been discovered that teaches us something different about evolution of some species, whether or not it's us or turtles or dolphins or, the list goes on and on. That's why I love them. There's always something new to learn, and it answers really big picture questions and concepts.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that too. When I was a kid, I probably still today, if I'm honest, I have a burning desire to be a paleontologist. So dinosaurs are a massive love of mine.
Yes.
So anything prehistoric is mind-blowing to me, and how that fits into us today is really cool to learn about. Have you had the opportunity to visit lots of different natural history museums in lots of different locations? I wondered what you think of that comparative experience.
Yes, I have had the luxury of visiting other natural history museums in other locations. And I will tell you that one of my ultimate favorites, and it's going to be a funny answer because it's not like the biggest or the most impressive, but one of my favorites is the Natural History Museum on the University of Oxford campus.
Okay.
What I really love about that museum is just the architecture, this is going to be such a Gen Z thing to say, but the vibes. But also there are these really cool parts of the museum where there are all of these columns made out of all the different types of stone that are native to the British Isles. And that is such like an incredible learning moment, because not only are you showing the strength of stone, how it can be used, but in context with actually where the museum is. And that makes that particular museum unique, because so many natural history museums cover all the exact same topics, or they try to have the exact same replicas of famous fossils, but not all of them have the fossils, right? Because only one museum can have it, the one copy. But I thought that one was particularly compelling and a very just generally enjoyable experience for me.
Oh, that's really cool to hear. I haven't even been to Oxford, so you've got me on that one. But you saying that does remind me there is a really nice natural history museum in Manchester University, so just a bit north of that. And it's tucked right into the campus, so you really have to know it's in there. And I love really small ones like that, where you can pull out the drawers and look at all the samples and look at all the different rock samples and stuff. It's a really nice example, pulling out where anybody does something unique, because as you say, there's the really big ones. I've been to the Natural History Museum in London. That's the one you have to go to if you're there. And
absolutely,
yeah, it's huge and it's almost overwhelming. There's so much stuff. But I love that example of those smaller ones as well. I think that's really important to remember. Are these the kinds of things you go into in your book beyond the halls? I mean, what was it that really motivated you to go, right, I love museums. Not enough other people love museums. I need to sort out this problem. What was it about all of that that got you to write that book?
It was exactly all of what you were describing. So when I was doing my studies in anthropology, towards the end of my undergraduate degree, I realized that my interests primarily lie in displays of human culture. And I was getting a professional museum studies certificate, and I was visiting at least one museum a week, many times more than one. And I was doing all of this writing and learning all of these things and having these great experiences. And I wanted to share that with other people. I wanted other people to enjoy museums and learn these valuable things that I was learning at my studies in a very specific kind of program. But I wanted it to be accessible and help people, love museums more, because it's important. And we can, of course, get into that later if you'd like. But ultimately, what I wanted to write was something that was accessible, because I believe museums should be accessible to everyone. So why would I want this book to be any different, right? I wanted something that wasn't a boring textbook, like truthfully, many of the books I had to read for class. And I wanted something that wasn't just a very specific guide to a specific kind of museum or place or period. I wanted it to be a general exploration of museums, especially for people who don't visit them or think they're not important or just want to understand them better. So that's ultimately what I produced, was a guide to loving museums that covers a ton of different areas.
Great. I wonder as well about What do people see as barriers to access, as you say? Because I know my experience in the UK, it's maybe seen as a very middle class thing to do is go to museums, even if most of them are free to go into. It's just something that other people do. Whereas my background is probably a bit unique in that my grandfather was a security guard in a living history museum. So I spent a lot of my summers just running about these fields in this living history museum. So it was a folk and transport museum. So I was vaguely learning about the history of my place. So it was the Ulster Folk and Transport Museum in Northern Ireland. They would have the actual cottages that people really lived in would have been taken apart and very carefully rebuilt on site. And sometimes they would have invigilators or demonstrators. The last time I was there, and this was just a few years ago, they had somebody using the looms, somebody actually weaving the way they would have a couple of 100 years ago, and telling us about it. I mean, it was just such a fascinating experience. Like you were saying, it's when you can actually see it and it comes alive for you, it's much more meaningful. So it's something I think about quite a bit is how do we get more people to realize this is for you as well? It's a big question. So just to try and drill into that a bit more, what approaches do you think are helpful in trying to achieve that?
That's a good one. I think it's a lot of what you just said, making museums accessible and in many ways entertaining. And the entertainment value can either be in your face or more nuanced. And here's kind of what I mean by that is within your face entertainment, you're going to have really interactive museums. Opportunities to ride on train cars, through 1920s Chicago, right? Or actually touching a moon rock, to use an earlier example. But then the other more nuanced ways in which museums can provide entertainment value is through fun games or educational curriculum that museum educators provide. And museum educator is like a specific position at a museum that I'm sure you're familiar with. And those are typically the people that lead school tours or field trips. And they will come up with a whole set of really interesting games or ways to interact with things as simple as a painting on a wall to really provide context, learning opportunity, and then something that's actually fun and memorable. So that's another thing that I really wanted people to have access to was games that they could play on their own in art museums and help them realize it's not as boring as you might think it is at face value.
Yeah, I suppose just to push a bit further with that point on interactivity, I'm a big fan of tours. I really like a museum tour and to see a place through the eyes of somebody, because it's usually a volunteer. It's not even always a member of staff. It's somebody who has such passion, or maybe they're a retired historian or something, and they have such passion that they want to lead people through and for you to see it through their eyes. I think the last time I managed to do that was in Edinburgh. I think it's the National Museum of Scotland. It was a retired historian, and he was just so lovely and so knowledgeable and just really passionate. You get a nice group of people and you're walking around together. And this was in December 2019. So this was before things were really looming properly. It was a real joy because I think, as I said earlier, you can get really overwhelmed if it's a very big museum with lots of different sections in it. It's trying to cover all the bases, and to just see it through, right, we're just going to look at these specific things and you're going to see a narrative unfold. That's something that's really engaging to me. What do you think about tours and that sort of thing? Because you can also get audio tours or apps and things like that that'll take you on a tour. I mean, do you have much experience of that, or what are your thoughts on those sorts of activities?
Absolutely. My personal opinion is that I love in-person tours more than anything because audio tours are great. They are accessible. You can use them at any time. You can access them from home in some cases. Personally, I'm less inclined to listen to an ambiguous robot voice as I'm walking through a museum. Way more inclined to exactly what you were saying. Watch a person get really animated and passionate about the thing that they're talking about. Hearing from their perspective, natural off-the-cuff storytelling and not as scripted recordings. I do really enjoy museum tours, especially in the before times. When I would travel to go see a museum, I would make an effort to try to book a museum tour, because that's also, if you have a limited amount of time in a city or in a place, they will show you the highlights. They will show you the most compelling pieces or artifacts that the museum has, and then tell you from their perspective. It gives you a really great insight into the culture of that place as well, getting to experience it through the eyes of a person who lives it.
Those online methods, is that something you've availed of in the past couple of years? Because we've had less access. I don't know what your pandemic experience has been, but have the museums near you been accessible through online means? I mean, there's all sorts of implications there with funding and who's able to provide that, of course. Then again, we've been able to access places in the world we may not have been able to before because we couldn't have travelled there. So I was wondering, how has your access to museums been in the past couple of years? Has it changed a lot?
I will say, so my book was published in December of 2019. So slightly the before times, right? I do talk a great deal about the digitization of museums and how a lot of museums, even before COVID, were starting to put a lot of their collections online to be more accessible to people, which is an absolutely great thing and speaks volumes about the rapid acceleration and development of the internet and digital access in general. Then during a global pandemic, that rapid acceleration towards digitization, such a hard word to say, is more important now than ever, because many museums, especially in the beginning, when everything, especially museums, had to shut down entirely, a lot of museums didn't bounce back from that. Some had to permanently close. Some are on the brink of having to permanently close. And so being able to provide visitors with ways to engage and support the museum from the comfort of their home has played an increasingly important role, not only in accessibility for learning opportunities, but also in supporting the museum's business model and keeping it open and continuing to be able to preserve cultural history. So locally, to answer your question, yes, the museums near me have done a really great job of providing virtual events, especially in the thick of it. As we were starting to get better, air quotes, a couple months ago, they were doing a really great job of providing outdoor events, things where people could come together, distanced, but still have these great learning opportunities. Or a lot of museums near me and across the country have implemented the concept of timed tickets. So that way you come at a certain time and there's not too many people in the museum at once, of course, to prevent the spread of disease. A lot of that has changed in the past couple weeks even. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
It's a lot to think about, I think. And as you say, the implications of that acceleration of moving everything online. We're in very intense times, it feels. There were times, especially very early on, when we didn't really know what this was yet, a year and a half ago. I felt a bit overwhelmed at thinking, oh, this has gone online. Oh, that's gone online. Oh, I can view that exhibition online. And feeling, but I need to get some work done. I can't just sit and look at museums at 360 degrees online all day. And ended up forgetting about most of it. So I think, in a way, personally, I've accessed museums and galleries probably a lot less than I would have done if I had have been able to just go, right, I'm just going to play truant for a day and just go and have a look around an exhibition or something. And I don't know how to even tell, but I wonder if other people have had that similar experience, or people have accessed it more because before they didn't have the time and then they're on furlough and they did, and all sorts of things. I think people who study this sort of thing in a formal way are going to have their work cut out for them to muddle through all of this. Would you like to receive updates, links and special offers straight to your inbox? Then visit audiovisualcultures.wordpress.com to sign up to our mailing list. Something I think about quite a lot as well is potential problems with museums, because we were talking earlier about some of the bigger, older ones, and especially here in the UK with such a vast colonial history, and places like the British Museum, which is an absolute global institution in many ways, because there's nothing actually British in there, very little anyway. everything's pilfered from everywhere else. And I was wondering if you ever come across people challenging you about that sort of thing, because I feel like it's something, well, we need to address it, we need to confront it, we need to just say, yeah, that's our history and that's that. But, how do you feel about those sorts of issues if they arise, and how you might deal with challenges to that?
I do really enjoy this topic. I like talking about the British Museum because truthfully, I have a love-hate relationship with it.
Yeah.
Because the very first time I got to visit the British Museum was in the summer of 2018. So I had not yet finished my degree. I was the summer before my senior year, budding anthropologist, just like jumping in my seat, waiting in line to get into the British Museum, because it is, you're absolutely right, this global institution where you can see thousands of years of human culture across the world in one place. And as I started walking through and seeing all of the things and wondering where they came from and how they came to be into that institution, and learning more about the ways in which those objects were acquired, and then some of the contentions regarding the fact that a lot of those objects have been requested to be formally returned and subsequently denied. So the more I learned, the more that the magic was kind of stripped away from me. So it's both a really wonderful institution. I absolutely believe that something like that should exist. But at the same time, yeah, you have really big ethical questions that need to be answered. And yes, people do challenge me on this topic. They will often say, well, especially in the case of the British Museum, if they started giving things back, they'd have to give everything back and then they'd have nothing left, which is such an exaggeration and far from the truth. But I think that certainly concessions do need to be made.
I think it's an important topic to face down, and I think we just need to be honest about our colonial pasts in this country. I think the sooner we are and the sooner we go, yeah, our ancestors did that, and it's not pretty and it's violent and it's horrible, and the sooner we might maybe move on as a society. But yeah, we need to find that balance of holding things in posterity and learning from that past, but also not just forgetting it and saying, oh, everything's fine, and whitewashing it, quite literally. It's good to know how you feel about that sort of thing. I think I had a similar experience when I first went. I think it was 2009 when I first went to the British Museum, and I had that. I was going around going, oh, everything's from everywhere else. And how did they get? Yeah, I had a very similar awakening to it, and then just gradually find out more and more. But that's not to say that people shouldn't go, because it's a really important institution, like so many of them. That's another really big example. And I do have a great love of small museums, curiosity type museums, really specific things, whether I've seen them myself or I've seen them on a TV program and they're on my list of places to visit. But I remember being in Barcelona one time, and there was a chocolate museum, and there was just all these sculptures made out of chocolate. I never intended to find somewhere. I wasn't looking for that. I didn't know I needed that in my life, but I went and I had a joyous time. So I was wondering if you had examples of things again that were smaller and were quirky, because we talked about the natural history examples earlier, but any other kinds of really specific things that you really love and would like to highlight?
There are hundreds of small and quirky museums. And the first one that comes to mind is so embarrassing, but it's hilarious. There is a toilet seat museum.
Oh, really?
In Texas, kind of off the beaten path. And it's not about the history of toilet seats or anything. More than anything, it's a public art display. So he has this, essentially a garage at this random man's property, where he has floor to ceiling toilet seats that people have decorated, signed, and just completely imprinted their personality onto. And I think that there is just so much to think about in terms of what that says about American culture, individualism, consumerism. Like, you really could get into the weeds with it, but also at the surface, it's this really fun and quirky, like, toilet seats, I think that's a fun example.
I have a friend who's an artist, and her work is really the weird things that she collects. and she's done residencies out in Virginia, really small towns in Virginia. And she's done artworks based on, right, this town has this particular mascot. And so she's made an art exhibition / museum out of things to do with this hot dog mascot. It's really super specific, really off the beaten track. I really love things like that really quite blur the boundary between what's an art exhibition and what's a museum collection.
Yeah.
Something that really muddies those waters. I'm quite into that. I'm quite interested and intrigued by things that aren't necessarily museums, but they draw you in and then you think, actually, this is quite like a museum. You probably have places like this in the United States as well. I don't know if you're aware of the National Trust, for example, or English Heritage. You probably are.
Yeah.
Their buildings, the places that they look after, they become museumified. I suppose that's something I was wondering what you thought of as well, is that idea of museumification, another awkward word.
Yeah.
That process of museumifying an old place or anything like that. Is that something you've encountered very much, or what do you think about that?
I would say that the National Trust in the United Kingdom is definitely more prevalent than the National Trust awareness in the United States. So similar concept, the National Trust here seeks to preserve places of architectural significance. But the National Trust in England is of a different breed. I say England because that's the specific region I've been exposed to the most. The National Trust in the United Kingdom is a different breed because it becomes something more of almost like a passport. You have all of these places where you see the little logo and you can almost fill them out and tick them off and go and visit them. It's also a significantly smaller country to explore. But getting to go to see places in Dover, you'd see the little logo. Going to the Stonehenge, I believe, is also included in the National Trust. The National Trust in England, definitely, and the United Kingdom, was certainly more obvious to me than the existence of a National Trust in the United States. And museumification. There are a lot of places, and I include them in the book, that don't necessarily feel like museums, but in many ways are, because museums are preservations of human culture. And if we look at it in that way, lots of things can be museums. Libraries kind of falls under that category. Historical homes certainly fall under that category. And so the museumification of something, if we want to think about that word, is probably including a gift shop, including educational materials to explain the context of the architecture of a place or its contents, ticketing and branding and all these things. So it's almost like the institutionalizing of something that makes it a formal museum.
And there are always those questions over things. What gets to be preserved? What is deemed worthy enough to be kept in posterity? Who makes those decisions? Who gets to decide who gets what money to make those decisions? So it unfolds and unfolds all the time. It's quite a complex issue, I think. I was quite recently at a National Trust property called Hanbury Hall in Worcestershire, and it was only saved because it has these specific wall paintings. They're actually part of the wall, these murals that are painted inside by a specific artist. They depict specific things. It's these Greek myth scenes, but the faces have been swapped out for political figures of the time as just a splash of, this is how wealthy we are. This is where our political leanings lie. You're welcome in this house if you're happy to discuss those things. And it was one of those where the big houses, they were falling, in the 1940s and 50s, and the families just couldn't afford to keep them on anymore. And a Labour government came in and there was very high taxes. And this was one out of hundreds that got saved only because of these paintings. So we've lost so many others that were similar, but this one's there because of those paintings, so it's that sort of question is what gets to save a place. It's quite interesting.
It is very interesting to think about the value theory of things, right? If you can come down and think about things of historical significance that may be easy to choose. Like I was reading this morning about an archaeological discovery of an almost fully intact tent made out of all the parts of a mammoth. And its claim to fame is that it's one of the most early examples of architecture. Like, how incredible is it to be able to say that you have that in your museum? So if you can say that the thing that you have is the first or an early example of, or something incredibly unique, that's often unique, and rarity ultimately is what makes things very important in museums. But the other thing that happens, like what's worthy of being on display, is often a matter of what they have access to. Sometimes museums can be dumping grounds for donations of people. I had a really interesting conversation and interview as part of my book with an exhibition director at the Houston Museum of Natural Science. We were standing in the Great Hall and he motions around and he goes, "Oh, everything is trash. Everything in this museum is trash." And I was like, come again? Everything is trash, because he was saying, at some point or another, it was something that someone didn't want anymore. Because if they really wanted it, they would hold on to it, hoard it, and want to have it for themselves. So either they didn't want it, or they passed away and their heirs didn't want it anymore and gifted it to the museum. So that's another interesting way that things end up in museums. And then because they're in a museum, there's this inherent perception of value because it's institutionalized, right? So a very interesting conversation.
I hadn't heard of that way of thinking about it before, but it makes total sense. I have managed to see behind the scenes a little bit one time in a museum when I was doing my PhD research. The curator of the Ulster Museum in Belfast was showing me some things because I was using something from their permanent collection. I was, I just needed to watch it and study it. Yeah, she was great. She gave me this very quick tour in the backstage spaces of the museum. And there were just all these great artworks and sculptures and artifacts and drawers and shelves full of boxes and everything. And she said, everything here is worthy of display. Everything here could be out there. Sometimes we circulate stuff, but people have their favorites. There are things out there that people just come here specifically to see. They want to see the Spanish Armada coins. They want to see the really beaten up bust of a T-Rex skull. When we've got actual dinosaur fossils here, but they're just these tiny fragments of things that people found on a beach. But they're real bits of actually well fossilized bits of actual dinosaur. It's the iceberg thing, I suppose, of what we see in a museum is just the 1/10. The 9/10 under is everything that's out the back that we don't get to see.
Absolutely.
Would you or someone you know make a great guest on Audiovisual Cultures? Then email audiovisualcultures@gmail.com to have a conversation. Mackenzie, is there anything else at all that you would like to chat about today? I feel like I've thrown a lot of questions at you. But if there's anything at all that you think is really important, like do you have just a message to put out there for people, anything at all like that you'd like to say?
Yeah, one thing I'd like to come back to that I briefly alluded to early on in our conversation is the importance of museums.
Sure.
Why they matter, why should we bother, why should we visit them? From what we've discussed, museums are places where cultural heritage is preserved. And if we are not supporting those institutions, visiting them, what happens to all of those things? Do they continue to be preserved? Not even just professionally, but just at all. What do we lose when we lose history? There's all of these doom and gloom concepts of like, oh, we're doomed to repeat it. But what I'm thinking of is just the learning opportunities, the immersive exhibits, the moments that things come alive really in your mind. Not only are they great spaces of community, but ultimately preservation of human culture. So I want to encourage people to visit, support, experience with your loved ones museums in all their glory.
That's great. Really good message, really important message. Mackenzie, where can we find out more about you and about your book?
You can read more about me and the book at mackenziefinklea.com. Pretty easy to remember. You can find the book on the ever ubiquitous Amazon.com. You can also find my book on bookshop.org, which I encourage people to support as well, to support independent bookstores across the world.
Excellent. I endorse that sentiment as well. Well, Mackenzie Finklea, it's been such a joy speaking with you today. You're very welcome back anytime. If you ever want to chat about a specific thing that you're working on, or if you have a new project coming out, just give us a shout. You're welcome back anytime. And it's been brilliant to have you today.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It's been such a joy talking to you, and I look forward to more chats in the future.
This is a Cozy Peapod production with me, Paula Blair. The music is Common Ground by Airtone, used under a 3.0 non-commercial Creative Commons license and is available at ccmixter.org. If you've enjoyed this episode, please give us a good rating, subscribe and recommend Audiovisual Cultures to a friend. All of our contact details, socials, information, ways to listen and our mailing list sign up can be found on our website, linked in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening and supporting. Take care and I'll catch you next time.